So this actually happened when I was a bit older. I was 17 at the time, and I had a crappy little Android phone that came from Walmart. You would buy a card for it and activate a code to get service every month too. Me though, I never really texted or called people much. I didn't go out a lot or anything either, so I also didn't really need data. I just wanted a phone so that I could connect to my Wi-Fi at home and go on social media and such because I didn't have a computer at the time. So I didn't usually worry about getting the monthly service. But because of this, I often got calls from random people trying to sell me more phone services too. Of course, I always ignored every phone call and text that I got, thinking that it was more people trying to sell me services because I hadn't given out my number to anyone. But one day, I got like 3 calls in a row from the same number, and they left some sort of voicemail that I deleted. I ignored it, thinking that it was once again someone trying to sell me stuff, but this time was different. The next day, I received multiple calls from the same number again, and even a few texts this time. The first text I got said something like, "If you don't return my calls by 7 a.m. tomorrow morning, I'm contacting the authorities." Obviously, I was very confused, but I just assumed it was someone who had the wrong number or something. The only thing was, because I didn't have service, I couldn't text them back to tell them this. And the next decision I made in this situation, I find just so incredibly stupid looking back on it. But I was still a teenager, and I guess I just didn't think that this would lead to another traumatizing internet stalking experience that would haunt me for quite a few years of my life. So, what I decided to do was I messaged my friend some screenshots of the text over Snapchat and explained to her what was going on. We talked about how strange the texts this person sent were for a minute, and then I asked her if she could tell this person they had the wrong number. My best friend, being just as confused and just as passive about the strange text as I was, said, "Yeah, sure." And then she told me a couple of minutes later that she had texted the person. We both joked a bit about it, trying to guess what the person might have wanted. We guessed some pretty funny stuff too. I think at one point, one of us even suggested it might have been somebody's baby mama looking for child support or something. It was all fun and games until I got a text from the number saying, "Who the fuck is this?" And after that, I wasn't laughing anymore. I later found out that my best friend, being about as bright as a lamp that's not turned on, had indeed texted this person that they had the wrong number, but when they asked, "Who is this?" she proceeded to tell them her name. Before I even had time to text my friend to ask her how this person knew her name though, I got a call from the number again. Terrified from not knowing at the time how this person knew my friend's name, I stupidly answered the call. I said hello nervously into the phone, and a woman with an unfamiliar voice responded saying that she was with the law enforcement and that she was looking for someone with a particular name. I was sure that I didn't know anyone by that name and told her that she had the wrong number. She said, "Are you sure? You better not be lying to me. I have your address written down and I can contact the police department." At this point, I was pretty scared because how did this woman know my address? My asthma started kicking in as I got more and more scared too. I stayed silent for a minute to compose myself, and I finally said, "Ma'am, I'm only 17 years old. I don't know who you're looking for, but I haven't done anything wrong." Before the woman had time to respond though, my mum burst into my room and asked me who I was talking to and if I was okay. I looked up at my mum almost in tears and told the woman that she could take this issue up with my mother, and handed my mum the phone telling her that it was a woman that was from law enforcement or something. My mum, knowing that I don't easily get scared like that, and knowing that I hadn't done anything wrong, immediately says to the woman, "Look lady, I don't know who you are, but you have the wrong number. My daughter hasn't done anything wrong." They talked on the phone for a few minutes, and finally my mum said goodbye and hung up the phone. She then told me that the woman said that she was just looking for her brother and that she wouldn't be calling my phone anymore and that I shouldn't answer phone calls from strangers. After I explained everything to my mum, I noticed that I had a bunch of messages on Snapchat from my friend. She said that the woman had left her a bunch of aggressive voicemails saying that if she didn't answer, that she could get in trouble for keeping information from an officer and that she needed to help her with some documents or something. I told my friend about how the lady changed her story when she was on the phone with my mum and told her to block the number, and she said that she already did. Thinking it was over, we talked about it for a while and just started joking again, and the rest of the day was completely normal, and eventually we just went to bed. The next morning, I had pretty much forgotten about the phone call and was checking all of my social media as usual. I was messaging some of my friends on Facebook Messenger when a notification popped up saying, "Session expired, please log in again." This usually happened when Messenger updated, so I wasn't too worried about it, and I tried to log in a million times and figured that I'd just forgotten my password or something. I clicked the password link and checked the email option and noticed I had an unfamiliar email. Figuring that it was just one of my aliases I had forgotten about because I had made up lots of different accounts and names to keep my previous stalkers from finding me, I moved on to the phone number option. And that's when I saw it. The number linked to my account, it wasn't mine. It was the number of the woman who had called me the day before, in fact. Obviously, I went into absolute panic. I mean, how did this woman get enough information on me to hack my Facebook from one phone call? I tried contacting Facebook and all the usual stuff to try and get back into my account. I eventually gave up, in fact, and made a new one, figuring that it might be for the best, and went on with my day. A few nights later, the Wi-Fi went down though. I tried everything to get it back up because I was in the middle of a serious life or death discussion about teenage drama with my friend when it went out. Nothing was working though, and I ended up having to go to my friend's house across the street and borrow her phone to call the internet provider. I eventually found out that the Wi-Fi password had been changed and no one in my family had changed it. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but after that, my phone started going nuts too. It'd just turn on by itself, apps would open up, I'd leave it on the table in another room, and I'd come back to find my gallery flooded with pictures of my ceiling. One time, there was even a selfie perspective picture that I didn't remember taking of me looking at something on my phone. But I knew these types of situations all too well, and obviously, someone had hacked my phone to stalk my phone activity and get information. I never did figure out who the woman was, or if this was even the same person, or why whoever was doing this was doing it, but I got a new phone and created all new accounts for everything, and all the weird stuff that was happening just stopped all of a sudden. I don't know what would have happened if the person had kept going and how much information they actually have on me still, but these days, I never answer phone calls from numbers that I don't know. I worked as an overnight security officer and had just gotten off my shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The building I patrolled was massive and completely dark at night. It was the middle of winter, and I'd spent all night checking the temperatures of the risers and investigating the semi-trucks that tried to park on the property without clearance. I really enjoyed this job, despite being told that I wasn't tough enough. 22-year-old woman and under 110 pounds. It was so silent that my ears would ring, and after my final tour, I waited in dispatch watching the cameras and listening to music. It was still dark outside when the relieving officer came in, and I had a long drive home ahead of me. After scraping off my car and mentally prepping myself for the drive, I was on the highway in about 10 minutes. I figured it would be an easy drive home as the cars were few and far in between, and I was 20 miles from home when I noticed a car speeding up behind me. I was already going over the limit by about 5 or 7, no rush because it had just been me, and they got into the fast lane and stayed tandem with my car. Speed up, guy, I thought to myself, and then he jerked his car towards mine, nearly hitting it, and sped up in front of me, braking hard. I laid on the horn and let off the brakes, trying to not get caught on the snowy edge of the road, and I slowed down and figured that I'd let him get ahead of me a bit just to be safe. He obviously didn't care about ramming into my car and endangering both of us, so passing him probably wasn't the best option, right? I plugged my phone in and waited for it to turn on in case I needed to call him in, and the safety barrier between us was getting smaller and smaller at this point. This asshole had slowed down to match me and then gotten into the fast lane beside me again, and I took my chance and sped up at this point, flooring it ahead of him as we swerved like a madman into my lane, just missing my bumper. I chanced to look at my phone, and it was still black, and I got into the earliest lane that I could for an exit into town. he gunned it to 85 behind me, trying to ram me again, and I swerved and regained control, just to have him slam on his brakes right in front of me again. I was going to lead this guy right to the police station. I was coming off the exit to a red light, and there were cars now, but he just disregarded them and stopped in front of me again. I had the PD on the phone and was giving them his plates, my plates, and everything, down to the description of the back of his head. I pleaded in my head for the light to turn green, and he was driving a beat-up Subaru, and I saw him scrambling for something crazily, and I unlocked my glove compartment where I keep my gun. I'd never want to have to use it, and thankfully to this day I've never had to, but it was troubling to say the least. I told the dispatcher that we were driving alongside the station, and she told me that there was a unit about a quarter mile away. She told me to remain on the phone with her and to not pull over. I continued my drive, although much slower now, and he zigzagged on the white line to prevent me from changing lanes. Just then, I saw blue lights behind me, and I heard a siren, and I asked the dispatcher if I should pull over as well to give a statement, but she said that it would be best not to. He pulled over reluctantly and parked crookedly in the shoulder, and I never heard how it played out, but I sure hope that the police did the right thing. I don't know what the guy was up to and why he was just so enraged at me, or what he was trying to achieve by swerving all over the road like that, but to be on a dark highway like that, pretty much all alone with nothing around and nobody to help you and pretty much at the mercy of the highway, it was pretty scary to say the least. Okay, so this just happened last night, and it's just kept me awake all night, and I can't stop thinking about it, so let me just share it. So, we've only been living here for a little over 3 months, and my window is the only window out of our entire house that has a view of the backyard, and it's also right next to our squeaky back door, meaning that I always hear when someone comes in and comes out. So, my family went out to run errands last night, leaving me home alone, trying to catch up on my classes, because, college life and all. And well, it was going pretty good for the first hour until I hear the back gate open and shut, and at first I thought, oh, hey, they must be back, thinking that my family had just come home, but that thought was immediately gone when I remembered that we have a front door and there is no reason for them to come in through the back. So I sit as still as I possibly can and listen. I start to hear the sound of crunching leaves too, like someone is stepping on them, but I can also hear that they're trying to move slowly. And at this point, they're right under my window, and I know this because we have a couch located right underneath it, and I hear someone actually sit on it and let out a quick grunt, which also let me find out that it was a man who was doing this. And I'm also feeling extremely grateful over my paranoia of having my blinds open at this point. I am completely freaking out now, not even able to move at all because there's literally someone sitting under my window, and I just sit there motionless for like 2 minutes until I start to hear a tapping. He was tapping on my damn window. They started out like light taps at first, and with each set of taps he added more weight to them, and I feel my eyes grow even wider and immediately feel like I'm going to pass out, and I still can't move. It's like I'm paralyzed with fear, and it just keeps going on, tapping and tapping, until finally I snap out of it, and immediately without shoes and in just sort of shorts and a tank top, I jump up and grab my keys and run out of the front door into a 30-degree weather night, which, in my defense, was definitely not the smartest thing to do, as who knows if he was alone. Someone could have been in the front, but at that moment I just didn't care. I didn't even feel cold, as I just needed to get out of there. I hopped into my car and drove off and parked at a Walmart nearby and sat there in shock, not even believing that had actually happened. I finally picked up my phone and see my hands are shaking really bad, but I managed to call my parents, and as soon as I hear my dad's voice, I burst out crying, not even being able to tell him until he just finally said that he was on his way, and not even 5 minutes later, they were there in the parking lot, where I finally calmed down enough and told him what had happened, and we went back home. I was terrified to go back, and even waited in the car until my dad came back from the backyard after inspecting it, and said that whoever it was, that they were gone now. We also debated about calling the police, but I honestly didn't think anything would come of it. But we would just file a report since I didn't even see his face at all, and he was probably long gone by now, but now I'm really regretting it because I'm still terrified and I don't feel safe in my own house anymore. I've been trying to distract myself all day now, but I'm just so shaken up and just hoping that I can forget about this whole incident soon. So when I was 5, my mum decided to leave my dad. She took me and my sister to a new house just outside of our village. Our house was a road just off the country lanes, a row of 5 terrace houses, and behind them was a large orchard that hid a few rundown barns. It was actually a pretty nice house, and from what I can remember, we actually had some pretty good times there. After a couple of months or so, though, we began to notice some weird things happening. One day, my mum, unemployed at the time, was cleaning the house and saw a man walking his dog around the houses. She took no notice until she realized that he was doing it at least 5 times every day whilst looking at the house and through the windows. We began to joke about it too and took little notice, as to us he was very clearly a stay-at-home nosy kind of guy. That was until one day my older sister, Amy, was out there with her friends. They began to notice the guy was following them home, and scared, they began to walk faster, and suddenly the guy goes into a full sprint, chasing them to our house, and after that it got a lot worse too. Our living room was right by the back door, and every night at 8 p.m. we'd hear this creaking sound. It wasn't until one night that my mum looked over and saw the handle to the back door slowly turning that we actually noticed what was going on. Luckily enough, we locked it every time we shut it, but we then began to notice that the house wasn't as empty as we'd thought. You know when you come home and you just know that the house has been empty all day and you're the only person there? Well, my mum and my sisters would come home, and every day they would say that they just knew that we weren't alone. Doors would be left open, things would be moved, our dog would be in a state, and the neighbours complained that he was barking a lot. He was a scrappy little dog, a Jack Russell in fact, but he was quite content when left alone. But due to there not being much evidence and nothing taken, for some reason my mum just never called the police. I guess she just blamed my sisters and tried not to think about it. Denial's a bitch, right? So, one night, however, my mum was awoken in the night to something moving in her room. To clarify, her brother had died 3 years prior to this, and my mum, since, has been very spiritual, so she believed that it was him watching over her. But she swore till this day, whatever was in that room she knew was bad. It wasn't her brother, and whether or not it was this guy, we don't know. But since then, my mum began to be extra careful with locking up the house and even telling the neighbours to keep an eye out. But it didn't seem to help at all. On my 6th birthday, we had a party, and being a pretty greedy kid, I ate too much and threw up, so my mum put me into bed. I shared a bunk bed with my other sister, Megan, and I was on the bottom and she was on the top. I laid with my head by the door and Mum leaving it open so the hallway light came in, as I was scared of the dark, and from where I could see, the loft door sat on the ceiling of the hallway. Disorientated and ill, I woke up a bit and looked up, and looking back, it terrifies me to this day, and the image stays in my mind forever, but that guy was staring at me from the attic door. Thinking I was dreaming at the time, I mentioned it to my mum and she played it off. That was until she was cleaning the house one day. After coming back upstairs to vacuum, she saw footprints on the wall leading to the attic. She remembered what I had said and asked her friend Susan to help her look up there. And what she found disturbed and scared all of us. There was a filthy mattress squished in the corner of the attic, newspaper clippings all over the floor with tins and bottles. The guy had been sleeping in our attic and coming down in the night and watching us sleep and walking through our house and getting stuff. He'd been pulling himself up into our attic, leaving footprints on the walls as he climbed up. Obviously, police were called, but not much could be done as we had no idea who this guy was. All we could remember was that he was bald, skinny, gaunt, and fucking terrifying. If you've ever seen the film Creep, the one where she's stuck in the underground trying to escape this cannibal deformed guy, he was basically like that. But one day though, me and my sisters and Susan's children, Mike and Holly, were walking through the orchard together, and my mum was cleaning the windows. She cleaned a lot, as you can tell, and she saw us and we waved over to her, and then she suddenly began banging on the window, mouthing the words "run." We darted to the house scared and confused, and it wasn't until I was 10 that my mum told me why she did that. Apparently, when she was washing the windows, she saw the man crawling on his hands and knees towards us through the orchard. He was allegedly about a tree away from me before we began running. God knows what would have happened if he had caught us. But another night, we were about to find out. So my sister Amy decided to have a sleepover with 2 friends, and Holly and Mike came because he and my other sister Megan were friends too. Me, Megan and Mike were asleep, and Mum was downstairs working, and my sister Amy and Holly and her friends were still up. My mum heard a tapping at the back window, and confused as our dog was in and it wasn't windy, we walked over, and upon opening the blinds, she saw him. He was stood at the window with a knife, and my mum said that there was a moment where they both looked at the back door, and the first time my mum had forgotten to lock it, and luckily as they both ran for it, he fell over on the deck chairs. Mum gathered us all in the bedroom, and till this day I remember the screaming and everyone running around. I remember looking down at the door and hearing him scream, "Let me in, I'm going to fucking kill you." I remember thinking that door wasn't going to hold. But the house was nice, but it was really old, and those doors weren't so strong. My mum barricaded the door though and rang the police, and then her friend Susan. Now, the police down our way are pretty useless. For instance, Susan was the first one to show up, and she lived like 6-minute drive away. And so we let her in, and my mum and her decided that they had no time to wait, and we get into groups. Susan takes me, Mike and Megan in her car, and my mum takes Amy, Holly and the girls in her car. We prepared and all stood at the door ready to run, and once out we sprinted to our cars. Susan was parked across the road, and as we buckled ourselves in, we heard screaming from my mum's car. My mum suddenly takes off and leaves. Thanks, Mum. We followed after, confused, and our mum then told us that after they had gotten into the car, the girls began screaming. My mum turned to her window after looking at the girls, and he was just stood there, face against the window trying to open the car door. And that was the last time that I ever saw that house again. But it didn't end there, and to cut a long story short, my mum went back to pack up, and he was there again. My mum's friend caught him in his car watching the house and called the police, who followed him to the gypsy site across the road from the orchard. Turns out that he apparently lived there all along. It wasn't until about 7 years ago that my mum told me that she heard that he was caught by the cops with stacks of child pornography in his house and was arrested for the attempted kidnap of an 8-year-old girl. Apparently, him tormenting us for nearly 6 months wasn't a warning sign, as no action was taken for that. The fucking police. Anyway, we figured out that he'd been getting in via the attics of the other houses, as they all share an attic. So, someone must have been leaving their windows open and allowing him to climb through and into our attic. Luckily, we never had any more encounters once we moved away. I'm now 22, and I'm living in a completely new town, and I've never seen or heard from him again. But every time I go home and we drive past that gypsy site, abandoned and run down, and it still sends chills right up my spine. A few months ago, I experienced one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. It's taken me a while to come around to writing this, but I feel it might help people to know you just can't trust everyone. So, me and 2 of my friends, Dee and Sarah, we went to meet Dee's boyfriend, whom she met on Tinder. We didn't think much of it because Dee has met him face to face before, and he lived about 30 minutes from our town, so we saw no problem with it. We went to the mall and hung out, and her boyfriend Jaden, he was actually a pretty cool guy, we got along really well, and I could see us being friends. Or so I thought, that is. About a week after us meeting, me, the same two girls, and my boyfriend, Peter, and I went to go see Jaden again. This time our intention was to get drunk and spend the night at his apartment too. When we got there, everything was going great and the boys got along really well, and us girls had been friends for a while, so it was perfect. We walked to the store to buy the gin, and upon getting back to the apartment, we immediately opened bottle number 1. Me, Dee, Sarah, and Peter aren't really drinkers, but Jaden insisted that he get us drunk because Sarah had never drunk before. But Jaden was quite the drinker, but didn't want to drink, which was okay because we would never force anyone to do that. We made it halfway through the first bottle with good conversations and jokes and great memories being made. Until Jaden decided to start drinking too. He chugged half the bottle of gin on his own, which me and my friends were pretty shocked by, to say the least. He even began on the second bottle by himself too. By the time that he had finished half of the second bottle, Peter had fallen asleep and so did Dee, so it was just me, Sarah, and Jaden hanging out super drunk. Peter passed out on the couch in Dee and Jaden's room, and me and my friend remained on Jaden's couch carrying out pointless drunk conversations until it turned for the worse. Jaden began a story saying how me and Sarah are best friends with Dee, and we corrected him saying that we're close friends but not best friends. But Jaden's face stiffened at this comment before he let out a cackled laugh that wrenched my stomach. He said that he had a twin brother that would be mad if we said anything about Dee, but up until this time he never mentioned having a brother at all. Me and Sarah shot confused looks at each other, but felt nothing was wrong and that maybe he was just too drunk. After that, he insisted that he make us a cot on the floor to sleep on, but we were much too uncomfortable to sleep at this point. So, upon our denial, he decided that he wanted to continue conversation. He asked me about 10 times if my boyfriend's name was truly Peter, in which I insisted it was. He then drunkenly asked me if I would swear that upon a silver blade. At this point, I just knew something wasn't quite right. He rose from the couch, walking to the kitchen, and me and my friend nervously walked a few paces behind him, and with everything in me, I couldn't tell you why we followed him. He began shifting through the knife drawer, finding nothing, and he then turned towards me and my friend, laughing, and said, "I can't kill myself in front of you, right?" At this time, I scanned his bare chest, seeing what looked like several scars from being stabbed, and I knew that this wasn't a twisted joke at this point. I got between him and Sarah, nervous of what he would do, and just then he reached for the butcher's block on his counter, and everything got worse. He pulled out the first handle his hand fell to, and luckily it was the knife sharpener. My eyes flashed over to the block quickly, and there was one more handle, and I knew for a fact that I couldn't be this lucky again. I quickly grabbed the second handle, which turned out to be a butcher's knife, and told him calmly that he wouldn't want this one, it was dirty, and tossed it in the sink. And I thank God every day that I reacted like that. But of course, it didn't end there. So me and him were standing toe-to-toe, his face hovering inches above mine. He held out his arm, showing me a big black tattoo, and he said that he got it years ago, and it was a demon that shared my name. I told him that I wasn't that demon because I was frightened and felt no reason to antagonize the situation any further. And then he brought his face closer to mine and said the words that will never leave my mind for as long as I live. He said, "Can I choke you and rip your organs out?" I looked over to Sarah and Dee, who had emerged from the room at some point during this conversation, and chuckled. I told him, theoretically speaking, that he could, but I'd rather him not. He then wrapped his hand around my throat, aiding more pressure than I could possibly be comfortable with, and he let go and repeated his question a bit louder and more aggressive this time. I knew at this point that he wasn't joking anymore, and I was terrified. I told him that I don't see why he would, as I give him no motive, and just as the words spilled from my mouth, he gripped my throat and shoved me against the wall. My head hit the wall hard, causing his 2 female roommates to run out of a nearby room. I was calmly looking around, and his hand was on my throat, and he was dragging me closer and closer to the sink, which I could only think would be to grab a knife. I was frozen with fear, and Dee tackled him off me, and my boyfriend woke up at this point. Sarah was in full panic, screaming that we needed to leave now. We quickly grabbed our stuff and ran to the car as fast as we could, but then I realized that we just left Dee and the other two girls there with him, so I darted to the window to see what was happening. Jaden had his roommate pressed to the sink, and I began screaming and banging on the window. He looked up and she tackled him to the ground, and as soon as I knew that they were away from the knives, I ran back to the apartment where the girl was still fighting him, and they were biting and kneeing each other to no avail. My boyfriend tackled him to the couch, and Jaden was screaming, kill me, demons." And that's when my boyfriend knew that he wasn't mentally okay. My boyfriend held him down and told him that it's okay and showed him love, which seemed to calm him a bit, but only for about 5 minutes. At the end of the calmness, he let out a blood-curdling scream and began biting my boyfriend's leg, and everyone was hitting him trying to remove him before he removed a piece of my boyfriend. He was grinding his teeth against my boyfriend's flesh, and as soon as he let go, my boyfriend slid away from him. Jaden sat up against the wall and started laughing like a fucking maniac, and then he immediately began puking blood and screaming for us to get away. We all took a step back, and he just started screaming at his roommate, calling her a whore and a demon. This started another full-on brawl between them two. Sarah was begging us to leave, but Dee refused to leave her side. And so we just left without Dee and just ran for it. Dee was okay in the end, and Jaden went to jail for domestic battery because apparently someone conveniently called in a noise complaint to the cops. He got 6 months in jail, and the cops know nothing about me or my boyfriend being there. But to this day, I can't help but think about what would have happened if Dee hadn't have woken up, or if we would have just gone to sleep. But to this day, too, I still have the actual scars from where he tore pieces of my neck away with his fingernails. It haunted me for a while, thinking that he would surely have come to finish what he started, but he hasn't, and we haven't seen the guy since. And who knows if he ever will.